When you create videos, you're probably going to film outside at one point or another, but be aware, filming outside can be tricky. Today, I'm going to give you some tips so you can get the best quality when you film outside. But of course, make sure to like this video and subscribe so you can make sure you get more future content from me. Like I said, outdoor filming can be very difficult. You run into these issues where it's either way too harsh or your footage ends up looking kind of weird and choppy. Some of these things you can't really avoid unless you have the right equipment. And I'm gonna assume that most of you who are filming videos are probably using auto settings, which that's fine, but if you want to really improve, let's not use those auto settings. So let's get started. One tip you can do is to crank your shutter speed up 2 clicks. Now, I've always been adamant about this rule, which is your shutter speed should always be double your frame rate. However, I also have the philosophy of you should learn the rules so that way you know how to break them. And this is one of those exceptions to that rule. If you remember, shutter speed controls the amount of time that your sensor is exposed to light. In order to get that cinematic look, you set your shutter speed to double the frame rate. But to be honest, you can set the shutter speed to whatever you want. It's just when it's a higher number, it's gonna look a little bit choppier. So 2 clicks up is not gonna make much of a difference. Shooting at a smaller aperture will help control the exposure of your image. The aperture controls the amount of light that is exposed to the sensor. So a smaller hole means less light will expose the sensor, and thus by doing so will lead to a less exposed image. But also remember, having a smaller aperture means more of the background is going to come in focus. So if you're filming close-up, you're going to want to have a larger aperture, but that also means your image is going to be really bright. So you have to find a right balance, or you have to properly shade or expose your image somehow. However, if you're going to do run and gun type stuff, then I think a smaller aperture would be very viable for filming. One of the best things you can do when filming outdoors is to use a lower ISO. To me, ISO really is just compensation for your image to help brighten it or to expose it properly. And depending on your camera, the more ISO you add, the more grain is going to be added to your image. One of the easiest things that you can take control of is to just shoot at a lower ISO. Now, I said let's not use the auto setting when it comes to filming video, and part of that rings true, but there are 2 other auto settings on your camera that you can use. That is, if you know how to use it properly. If you understand aperture and shutter speed, feel free to change your video exposure setting to aperture or shutter priority mode. Every camera is going to be a little different. There should be a way that you can change your exposure setting to be from full manual to either the aperture or the shutter setting. What these settings do is give you priority to control one aspect of the exposure. Let's go with the aperture priority. So from there, you get to set your aperture to whatever you want, and then your camera will take over and change the shutter speed based off of just however you want your exposure setting to be. Now, the only way this works too is if you're using an auto lens. So if your lens is all manual, then it's probably not going to work the best. But if you have a standard electronic lens, I think this is probably one of the better options to use. One physical thing that you can do for your camera that'll absolutely help your image is to use an ND filter on your lens. The analogy I've said is that NDs are like sunglasses. Basically, it cuts down on the brightness outside. So I highly recommend that you invest in a set of NDs, or better yet, get a variable ND filter. But putting one on, you don't have to change your shutter speed, and then you can also shoot at very shallow depths of fields. So this is perfect if you want to do cinematic close-ups. This tip is more logistical and definitely something that's pretty easy to control, which is just avoid shooting during midday. Shooting at midday tends to have harsher looking light, and also the light is not very textured. That is, there's no shadows. Plus, if you're taking photos or video of someone at midday, then the light above them, it's going to create these ugly looking shadows on their face. So it's not going to spread very well. Personally, when I try to film outside, I always try to do late afternoon to like evening time, which is known as golden hour. You can even do early morning too, but you know, I like my sleep. And this leads into my other tip, which is to use the sun as a side light or as your backlight. Basically, the sun is the brightest light source out there, so there's no way you can really compete with it. If you have your subject facing the light, it's really gonna expose your subject. You can go for it, but then your subject is gonna get flattened into the background. Plus, if you're filming with a person, they're probably not gonna appreciate having the sun right in their eyes. One of the best things you can do is use the sun as your side light or your backlight. By having the sun as the backlight or the side light, gives more texture and more shadows for you to play with. And no matter what, if you are filming outside, you want to try to favor filming under shade. Under shade, it'll spread the light more evenly, but it'll still give you a nice exposed look. The people you're filming with will appreciate it too, because then they're not just being beaten by the sun. But by filming under shade, it'll give you a little bit more control of exposure and just make your subject look a little bit more even. So after hearing all these tips, there are all these rules out there for filmmaking. These are just kind of like guidelines. You can break them, or there is always an exception in order to help you when it comes to your creative vision. So if you guys really like these outdoor filming tips, make sure to like this video, and definitely you want to subscribe so you can see more future content. And definitely follow me on Instagram so you can see more behind the scenes type content. And leave a comment below. Let me know what your favorite tip was. What's something you just learned now? So until next video, see ya.